Well, it's Friday, so I thought I'd do something a little not controversial and talk about protests. Yes, when are protests okay? Let's have a look at a bit of a history of them. So just reading from the news article here, the occupiers are showing no sign of moving on. Occupiers do not believe the notice to leave the land has any legal standing. Most of the occupation is on council land. They've got no plans to end. Music is playing. Food is being prepared to commemorate the passing of a year since the occupation began. Not talking about that Wellington protest that's happening. Well, it's in Wellington, this one. This is the Shelley Bay protest that's happening on Miramar Peninsula in Wellington that happened the end of last year. And that's Andy Foster, the Wellington mayor, helping erect one of the tents. He didn't realise it was a protest. He thought it was a gathering. So, look, sorry, not the protest you were thinking of. This media report, the heavy police presence shows little signs of abating 4 days after they arrived. More than half a dozen people were arrested last night, attempting to block the road. Some were initially openly hostile to the rows of police. And there's roughly 100 officers. Police have arrested several protesters who tried to block part of the main road. Once again, not talking about Wellington, no, we're talking about Ihumātao, and talking about this sort of radical fringe group that were part of Ihumātao protest. They were trying to blockade the motorway, the main road through to the airport. So there was illegal activity, there was arrests, police involved in that illegal occupation, and check out this video. Can you believe it? There were children involved in that protest at Ihumātao. But hey, that's okay. The Greens turned up because they wanted to dialogue. In fact, we even had Amnesty International turn up. They were monitoring the human rights situation. I wonder if they're actually at Parliament grounds at the moment monitoring the human rights situation. Perhaps somebody could confirm that. And, despite it being illegal and police and protests and arrests, government ministers were welcomed and the government entered into dialogue. So that was Ihumātao. Yeah, I haven't got to the Wellington protest yet. There was another protest, and this one involved breaking through police lines and illegal activity, and that was on the Harbour Bridge. A whole lot of bikers illegally biking on the Harbour Bridge in their leotards because they wanted a bike lane, and shock horror, there's children involved. Breaking the law, breaking through the police barrier. Now, interestingly enough, our good friend Chloe Schwarbrick wrote about this protest, and she said that protest is a language of change. And she said in the article, many of the developments we're proudest of as a country, whether it's revitalisation of te reo Māori, affirming rainbow rights, standing against apartheid and nuclear weapons, or even the century-old establishment of the welfare state, were typically pretty tense clashes. They didn't come easy. Now, there's your immediate indication of when protests are okay. Okay? Generally left-wing narratives. She goes on and says, we've seen the police in riot formation at Ihumātao, and a frequently present police line continues to observe tangata whenua occupying Waihiki's Putiki Bay, Kennedy Point. Protest is the language of change, falling on deaf ears and defunct processes. That change does not happen by sitting still and hoping those with the power come to the right conclusion. That's not how history has been made. And of course, she was involved in a 2017 protest where they actually blocked the public from accessing Westpac Stadium when there was a conference being held there. So that was an illegal protest, wasn't it? And that was blocking people, that was inhibiting Wellingtons carrying on their normal business. And Chloe was interviewed at that protest.
It's really crucial that we do things like protests, and we do stand up and we do have those difficult and uncomfortable conversations, because otherwise nothing is ever going to change.
Yeah, and well done, Chloe. I mean, we always agree with Chloe, don't we? I mean, protest is part of it. The interesting thing about that Harbour Bridge protest was that immediately after that, Michael Wood announced that he was going to spend a obscene amount of money on a bike lane across the Harbour Bridge. It got overturned because it was such a dumb idea. This is the same Michael Wood who says that the protest at Parliament involves filth and fascists and every other mean word that he can come up with. And the government has been called out for their hypocrisy in their approach to protests by none other than Winston Peters, who says this: He says, the sound bites and pictures of violence broadcast by media might help paint the narrative for the government, but they're far from the truth. The vast majority are ordinary Kiwis who are just fed up. What the government fails to grasp is that this isn't about the protesters at Parliament. There are hundreds of thousands of Kiwis who have had enough, and the government ignores those Kiwis at their peril. Make no mistake, the government has created the environment for this violence to take hold, and the Speaker of the House has inexplicably continued to throw fuel on the fire with his juvenile, power-drunk behaviour. And he makes a very good comparison between the approach to Ihumatao and the approach to the protest at Parliament. Both involve protest, occupation, structures and vehicles. But Ihumatao is secrecy, negotiation, ministers and sympathy. Parliament is ignored, accused, abused and abandoned. Prime Minister, why the difference? Hypocrisy. And that is the truth. When is a protest okay? When it fits the left-wing narrative, when it fits the woke narrative. But if you can paint it as far right, or if it's some other value that they don't like, then it's a terrible protest and it should be labelled negatively. The problem is that the protest represents very genuine concerns, and you only have to look at what some legal academics have said that aren't exactly conservative type academics. Andrew Geddes said that the law, the mandate law that allows the state to say, put this in your body or else largely forgo social interactions, should be given time for proper scrutiny and debate, which of course it wasn't. Victoria University of Wellington law professor Dean Knight says legislative change seriously implicating rights like this needs much more time to breathe, to be interrogated, and for its legitimacy to be built through dialogue. But that hasn't happened, and so you have people who are genuinely concerned. And it's painted as a right-wing protest on Parliament, but the fact of the matter is the surveys show that there's a lot of Labour voters, Green voters, and Māori Party voters there as well. And having run some protests and knowing what happens, unfortunately you do attract that fringe element, that very negative fringe element. I saw this cartoon and I thought it really did sum it up. You have the main group, which has the key message, but the cameras will always focus on the extreme group. Now, obviously left-wing media, left-wing blog sites have quickly tried to demonise what's happening at Parliament, despite it being a protest of a similar vein of other protests that I've referred to. And you've got left-wing blog sites like The Spin-Off saying the protest that revealed a new, ugly, dangerous side to our country. And they quote research that says this: COVID-19 and vaccination are being used as a kind of Trojan horse for norm setting and norm entrenchment of far-right ideologies in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Such ideologies include, but are not limited to, ideas about gun control, anti-Māori sentiment, anti-LGBTQIA+, conservative ideals around family and family structure, misogyny and anti-immigration. Myths and disinformation and dangerous speech pose significant threats to social cohesion, freedom of expression, inclusion and safety. I mean, they really are getting paranoid there, aren't they? And there's a lot of negative labels, all targeted at the right, despite the fact that there's a lot of Labour, Green, Māori Party voters who are currently at Parliament grounds. I mean, I think probably what the Spin-Off did get right was the title of that article, which is this: the protest that revealed a new, ugly, dangerous side to our country. And what is that ugly side? It's the fact that if the media and the politicians don't agree with the sentiment or the narrative or think that it's right-wing, then they will demonise the protest. They won't even engage. And unfortunately, that reveals a dark side of the country. We need to dialogue, even with people we disagree with.